Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to this month's Instant Insight webinar brought to you by Aero SI's Learning Services. Today, David Lover will be speaking about innovating with unified communications and what you should know from the Aero SI's perspective. Just a few notes as we go through the presentation. All lines are now on mute. If you have a question, you have the option to type a question in the chat box, and we will get to as many questions as possible. With that said, Dave, I will hand the line over to you.
Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Especially the ones that repeat customers from our last session, which we had a really great turnout. Another good one here as well. This month's topic is about unified communications, and I take a slightly different approach with this one because I see a lot of customers talking about unified communications and wanting to do unified communications, but again, they don't really know why. They're doing it for kind of the reasons that the manufacturers state, like, hey, here's instant messaging, here's presence, here's video, here's voice, and kind of doing it just the way that the manufacturer prescribes you do it. And I think that's kind of missing the point. I think, and what I'll show you is how you really can drive some significant innovation in your business when you leverage unified communications for something else. And so I always start, this conversation with coffee. For one, it is the greatest thing on the planet. I'm a big believer that, I know personally I would die without coffee. And the beauty of coffee is that it's really, really cheap. The amount of coffee needed to make a cup of coffee, it only costs you like 1 to 2 cents. I mean, it's just nothing, right? And it's a great and glorious thing. The only problem is I'm not quite to the point where I want to take the coffee beans and just start chewing them up and putting them in between my cheek and gum or something crazy. So you have to do something with that coffee. You have to boil water, and you have to grind the beans and sift the water through the coffee, and all of a sudden you can get this cup. So you have to deploy it, basically. And the beauty of that is it's still not really adding that much to the cost of that cup of coffee. Maybe at most 25 cents to get a consumable product that delivers all of the glorious benefits that is coffee. Then, with coffee only costing 25 cents, I gotta wonder, why is it that every single one of us is more than willing to stand in really long lines at a Starbucks or a Caribou, or a Tom, or whatever your favorite coffee is of choice? There's always a line, and it's just okay with doing it, and we pay a fortune for it. And so the question is, why is it that we go from a commodity, of these coffee beans that is just super cheap, to deployed correctly, so you can actually consume it, to something significantly different and more expensive? And it's really about, again, that experience, or the relevance. And I'll go so far as to say that innovation. Now, for those of you that are now saying, okay, why are we talking about coffee? I thought this was about unified communications. If you think about it, this is exactly what the issues we run in the telephony world, right? Where we've got these commodity components. I'm going to call them voice, video, instant messaging, and presence, deployed correctly, right? Aero SI is a fantastic deployer of these kinds of technologies, and we can easily get all this stuff up and running. That's the easy part. But the question is, what are you going to do with it? How is it going to change your business? Or are you just totally okay with, the makers of the coffee, and that's how it should always be, and sell it at that low price? Well, to me, it's all about taking those commodity components and doing something more interesting with them. And you almost have to do this, because when you look at the return on investment associated with unified communications, the numbers are horrible. I don't know if everybody on the call knows or remembers Marty Parker. Marty Parker has been in the communications industry for a very long time. He was the AT&T Lucent guy who basically invented invented voicemail. He was product manager for the Intuitiotics, and he's since not doing that. He's off doing consulting, and he came up with a really interesting study that talks about the ROI of unified communications, and it starts out pretty bad, right? Where the UC system has an ROI of about 35%. trust me, CFOs do not want to pay for something that only has an ROI of 35%. And if you break down those commodity components, the story gets worse, to be honest, right? Where you're talking about voice over IP has a negative 6%, or telephones have a negative 12%. Now you start getting into mobility, that comes up a little more. You get into conferencing. I'd probably argue conferencing is higher now simply by bringing it back in-house. Most people outsourced all their conferencing because it was hard and it was difficult to scale. Well, between SIP trunks and the technologies that are available, it is absolutely time to bring conferencing back in-house. And even instant messaging and presence has a decent ROI. But the question is, if these numbers are still painfully low, in my opinion. And Marty determined that it's not until you start applying those commodity components, voice, video, instant messaging, and presence, to do something more interesting, that's where you get the ROI. So things like a resource locator, almost 600% ROI. Maybe adding communications and portals or line of business apps, you get significant more return on the investment when you start looking at applying the technology to what you do. And the first one, that's this almost 600% for a resource locator, that was, to me, just screams low-hanging fruit. And so it turns out we, within Arrow, came up with a unified communication-based application to help with a very specific business problem that we had. And it's all about, finding a subject matter expert. And I think those of you in our, either in this industry or the whole, the significant delays and inefficiencies of a new employee or an uneducated employee who just doesn't know where they need to go to get something done. And again, we've all been there. We've all been the new employee, and you're like, I don't even know how to fill out an expense report. I don't know who I should talk to about my benefits. And as a new employee, you start scrambling, trying to find those experts. And the first thing most people do, probably incorrectly, is they go to their boss. It never fails. Your boss rarely is the expert on how to help you with those things. They send you off on wild goose chases that go, well, I think Linda was just doing this. You should go talk to Linda. And Linda says, why are you talking to me? Here, go talk to this person. And you get this runaround. And most new employees are extremely frustrated by the end of this process, especially when they finally find the person, right? Whether it's days, weeks later, they find the person of, oh, yeah, that's who, that's the one. And you're venting to them, right? You're like, oh, God, I talked to Linda, then I talked to John, then I talked to Mike, and then I talked to Doug, and now I'm finally at you. And they're like, well, yeah, this is what I do. Why don't you just come to me? Almost adding more to the frustration of this. Well, we have the same issue internally within Arrow because we have a huge portfolio, right? A lot of you know us as an Avaya business partner, but we are also NEC. We work with Mitel. We work with Microsoft. We work with Cisco. We work with tons of things on the data center platforms like HP and NetApp and EMC and Nutanix. And the question is, how do our salespeople find the experts? And we've determined, we've quantified that our good salespeople, our most successful salespeople, are the ones who know how to find the experts. We know they're not going to do it all themselves, but the key is, well, yeah, okay, you need to go talk to John because he's an expert in session manager. Well, the one thing that we've learned about subject matter experts, Arrow has a ton of them, but the problem is those experts aren't necessarily, it's not really their job to help a salesperson. Like they might be in post-sale implementations or they're an install technician. So they're, because I think a lot of people are saying, well, God, all you need is a call center, right? Just get a call center and have them log in as an agent. And then, when you go, you get to a menu tree, press 1 if you need an expert in this, press 2 if you need an expert in that. And the reality is those people it's not their job to sit on a call center split. So the question is, how do I expose their availability and get to the first call resolution kind of concept. So the characteristics of call center directly apply, but we need to do it in a more creative way. So like I said, we came up with an app. We wrote a portal that ultimately dips into Avaya. We dip into Microsoft Exchange. We dip into Link/Skype for Business, and we pull the state information, commonly known as presence, and we figured out, well, okay, if so-and-so is not on the phone, they are in the office, and they have touched their keyboard in the last 12 minutes, those people would, and I'll use the word bored, we know they're not, but they're available. Because that's the other thing we've learned about subject matter experts is subject matter experts whose job it isn't to talk to, be available for salespeople, they're really, 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 really super helpful when they're not buried, when they're not just, in the middle of a bunch of projects, they've got a workflow going in their head or whatever. They're helpful when they're bored. Their flip side is they are not helpful in any way, shape, or form, dare I say mean and angry when they're buried because they've got other stuff to do. And so what we had to do was try to figure that out. And so again, this is something we came up with that we use internally. It's a portal people go to, ucexpert.arrowsi.com, and it's organized based on our portfolio and our products that we have, and they can go in and you can see some of the the things here. What you can't really see is if I were to hover over this, it would show who those experts are. This first icon, meaning green, says one of our experts is quote unquote bored at the moment because we have aggregated their various sources of presence, which is one of those commodity UC components, and aggregated it in such a way to determine a true availability. Now, if they could click on that and have a chat with them, or they could click on the next icon to do voice or video, or click on the next one to have the person call them back, or click on the next one to send them an email. And the point of all of this is, again, to find the exposed expert in the state that they're most friendly, I guess, is the thing. So like in our environment, our sales rep would simply go, they'd click on it, and in this case, Ashish is asking a question about Password Pro as an example. And his question, that he filled on this little web form, hey, how do we keep track of previously stored passwords within Password Pro? Well, all of a sudden it says, oh, Dave Lover, because I'm actually one of the experts on Password Pro. I am not a call center agent. I'm not a pre-sales resource, per se. And so all of a sudden it gets assigned to me because it determines that I'm not on the phone, I'm in the building, meaning I'm not out of the office, I'm not in a meeting, and I have touched my computer in the last 12 minutes. And all of a sudden I get a pop-up for me, it's Microsoft Link, Skype for Business, and I can go, and respond to it in my native tool that I'm using. So I could say, oh yeah, absolutely. Hey, we use a one-way hash encryption, mathematically impossible to change back and do a password, blah, 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 blah. And I reply to it. Ashish received that back in his original window, respond back. So again, I've done a couple of things there, right? I've started in one mode and changed to another mode. My point is not talking about this as a product per se. My point is we took commodity components and we put them in a more creative way that the manufacturer they didn't make this product. Avaya did not make this product. Cisco did not make this product. Microsoft did not make this product. But I took all of their tools, all of their platforms, and brought them together to do something different. And I can tell you absolutely positively that our ROI on this investment in that technology is absolutely in that range of 600%. And so it solved a ton of issues for us as a business. Adding, again, I'm selfish about this. I'm thinking the stickiness of the Avaya or stickiness of the Microsoft, keeping those platforms in place, justifying why did we buy this system? Why did we pay for the upgrade? Trust me, you don't upgrade only because the manufacturer end up supported the old stuff. You upgrade because they've got new capabilities and new features. And the features that I was looking for was an exposed set of APIs. We'll talk about it. One particular scenario with Avaya is called Breeze, formerly known as EDP, and it allows you to very easily craft some of these things. So that's an example, right? And what everybody ultimately has to do is to find out, oh, well, that's cool. I wonder what I could do with commodity voice, video, instant messaging at present, beyond just the, oh, I have a phone on my desk. Yeah, that's creative. You know, we've only had that for hundreds of years. Or, oh, well, I'm very innovative. I've replaced them with soft phones. Yeah, oh, okay. I hope you didn't do it thinking you were going to save money, right? Because a soft phone actually in the long run costs you more because headsets cost more over the lifespan versus a hard physical telephone. You know, they're about the same price nowadays, you know, between a headset plugged into a PC and a desk phone. And a desk phone lasts way longer than a headset does. And so it ends up being drastically cheaper in the long run. The point is, you got to be creative. You got to think about, why am I buying this and what am I doing? And I always go to Gartner, you know, for these kind of things, especially when I talk to customers that don't necessarily know what their strategic initiative are. You know, if you say, well, our strategic initiative is to upgrade the voicemail platform this year, probably not. Probably not a strategic initiative. I don't think your CEO or CFO cares about it. It's an expense that they, you know, especially voicemail. We're like, why do I need voicemail? Everybody hates their own voicemail. Doesn't mean you rip it out, because you got to think of call coverage. That's really the, you know, you gonna let that ring forever? No. But the point is, what am I going to do with that, and how am I going to think of my infrastructure more strategically than just replacing old telephony? And so this is one of the lists that Gartner comes up with. They do a thing called the CIO agenda, and they talk about, they poll, you know, like 4,000 CIOs and say, what are some of your big business priorities this year? And I love using this list as a conversation starter, because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, you know, I do remember our CEO talking about, you know, how we need to go get more customers. And then my follow-up question is, well, what role did you play in that? And most of the time is, oh no, I don't know, I'm not sure who's doing that. And I'm like, well, are you looking at multi-channel in your contact center? Because most, you know, what I found is most of the way you attract new customers is, are you communicating with them in the way that they want to communicate? Do they want to call into your call center, or would they rather text you, or would they rather go to a portal on a website? There's a lot of other things, and if you start taking all of your day-to-day projects and put them in these buckets that you see on the screen, this changes the conversation entirely. It gets you budget that you probably, you know, we can always tell if all of a sudden your budget gets cut year after year after year. It's probably because you didn't come up with anything strategic. And so those are the kinds of things that we have to take a look at and see what we're doing. So this list, those things that we try to do to figure out what's happening with our customers. So the other thing that I always like to do is to say, well, how can we automate tasks? You know, and it's all about analytics and machine learning. What are those things that we can do? So the point of the door to balloon is in healthcare. There's a very interesting metric called door to balloon, and it's all about when a patient hits the emergency room door. Once they're diagnosed with a STEMI, which is an ST elevated myocardial infarction, the concept here is, how do I eliminate that?
Doing is the door to balloon is a metric that we use, and the interesting part of this metric is the ability to automate some of these tasks. I mean, most customers, believe it or not, most hospitals don't actually achieve some of these goals that they talk about, you know, getting that under 90 minutes or less. And so the thing is, what can we do to automate some of that? And the interesting thing here is, you know, if you were to Google door to balloon, there's a 7-step program that the Door to Balloon Alliance talks about, of automating this, and it's very much communications related. And so a lot of these things, if we could implement them and change them in different directions to assist with that, because usually what happens is you have to get the right staff involved, and you have to make sure that the people, you know, whether you need one radiologist, one cardiologist, you know, an anesthetist, getting everybody in line, that's an important thing that we can do.
So the premise of this is, again, are there things that we can automate to reduce the door-to-balloon time of a customer or of a hospital? And I guarantee most hospitals don't leverage their communications infrastructure in a way beyond just kind of the old school, having phones, calling people, manually dialing to get the appropriate resources where they need. And if there are things that we can do to say, what if I could push a single button? Like item number 2, single call activation. There's no reason why that can't be a system that says, let's go get that resource, let's go get that anesthetist, the radiologist, the cardiologist, get them on a conference call, or get them, to a room and close loop that entire process. It becomes a pretty big deal, and again, I guarantee you'll get budget when you think of your communications solution in a way that saves lives, in a way that saves, the metrics that are being used to judge a hospital. And again, it's all about having multiple access to multimedia, having the closed loop environment, having everything real time. That becomes a big deal. Another scenario that's interesting, and I have a lot of healthcare examples, mainly because I think it's very relevant, low-hanging fruit, and again, I think of it as something we all can relate to. But there's this trend called the Internet of Things. I think a lot of people think of, when they think of the Internet, it's all started with the Internet of Information, right? Literally the web and Google and everything else. Then kind of came the Internet of People, which is like LinkedIn and Facebook. And the Internet of Places, right, with Yelp and Foursquare at the time. Well, and then there's this Internet of Things that it talks about this connectedness between sensors and even video, voice and video being delivered to things that you wouldn't normally think of in those environments. And what's interesting about this is when I can take some of these modules that already exist. And this is an interesting play for Era because one of our biggest sources of revenue actually is associated with sensors. Our global components division. And so we do a lot of these kind of things. Anything that you interact with, from a computer to your Apple Watch, there's a good chance that there are things that Aero Electronics sells to those manufacturers to put in those devices. But the trick is, how do I add communications to that? And we're working with a lot of customers that are thinking about their communication solution very differently in the past. A really interesting example. We have a hospital who, first let me give you a little background. In the world of healthcare, there's this view that hospitals and doctors don't really care as much about your health as insurance companies do, right? An insurance company, if you think about it, makes all of their money when you are healthy because they don't have to pay out claims. So they make money when you're healthy. Doctors, on the other hand, typically make money when you're sick. And to kind of prove that out, think about the last piece of healthful literature that you received. Are you eating well? Are you exercising? Are you doing the things you should be doing to be healthy? Who did it come from? I guarantee it didn't come from your doctor. It came from your insurance company. And so this is kind of what the Obamacare and the Affordable Health Care Act is all about, is incenting healthcare organizations to be more participative in preventative medicine. And when you look at those kinds of things, and we're literally, the hospital that we're working with says, I have money to be more preventative, and we're looking to do some things. Can you help us? And so we came in and we did a brainstorming session. And one of the things that we found out is they have available capacity with their physical fitness trainers. Whether it's for rehab or, again, usually it's some kind of a physical fitness, but they're available. And so we came up with this idea of an app that people could put on their iPhone or their Android phone, and it would talk to their Apple Watch, their Microsoft Band. Everybody on the planet seems to have some wearable that is tracking either steps, heart rate, various biometric kinds of things. It's all consumer-based. And the beauty is they talk to the smartphone, and we can write a smartphone app. And so the premise of this was that we write this app so that if a patient wanted to go jogging, and anybody who's ever paid for a personal trainer knows how expensive this stuff is, but they want a subscription so that when they go jogging, they could open up their app, push a button, and we called it Run With Me, and they could go out and partner up, and as soon as they push that button, it places a quote unquote call into in this case, the Avaya contact center, where they had physical fitness trainers available who are kind of virtually running with the subscriber. And the trainer has access to all of the biometric data from the, whether it's the Apple Watch or the Microsoft Bands or the two that we see a lot of activity with. But we get also the GPS data off of the phone. We can have access to the playlist. So, picture I'm running and the trainer knows that you've got a big hill coming up. He's like, okay, I want you to push through this. Let's give you a little Eye of the Tiger going here. Let me play that. And well, wait, slow down. Your heart rate's a little high. Let's kind of back that off a little bit. But it's this idea of kind of virtually participating in somebody's jogging. And the point is, all of that content, the customer already had the Avaya platform, the contact center. The subscribers already had the watch or the app, and it was really just a matter of piecing these things together. So you take some kind of an IoT-based sensor. Jabra even makes a headset that monitors your heart rate. We feed it into a contact center. We use WebRTC. We use CafeX. We use the mobile information. We feed that into some platforms behind the scenes to get to the right user, and ultimately, we monitor and manage the whole thing. So all it is taking existing commodity off-the-shelf components, voice, video, instant messaging, and presence, and just putting them together in a more creative way. And so we start seeing a lot of that. And the question is, well, how do we do that? I mean, that sounds cool and all, but how do we get into these systems? And one of the things that I look for all the time is how accessible are the features of a platform in a way, again, that the manufacturer, it hasn't kind of built in, with a standardized feature. And so I think of APIs. And in the traditional world, I bet a lot of people on the call have an AES server, right? Probably because somebody told you to buy one. It's very common for a call recording company. If you do any kind of call recording with NICE, Calabrio, Verint, those guys, the way they talk to the Avaya system is through an AES server, and they expose a number of APIs like TSAP, EJTAPI, some of the DMCC. You guys know those licenses that you have. When I look at that, I say, well, that's pretty cool. You can do some other amazing kinds of things with it. But the reality of it is those APIs are a little bit, they're dated for one, but they're not the way that most developers program. Certainly not the ones that you would have. I have developers that do TSAP and DMCC, but they're hard. I mean, the reality is you have to understand the life cycle of a phone call. You have to understand how you go from setting up a call, tearing down a call, all the timers involved. You have to know that. And most of your developers wouldn't think that way. You wouldn't kind of take that approach, and you don't want to have to learn all these things. It becomes a big development cycle to do something very simple. And so that's where this idea of web services comes in. If you were to ask your developers, well, what do you prefer to use? Most people are saying, yeah, we're doing everything in Java right now, and I want it as a web service. And we think of, they call them as RESTful APIs, REST-based APIs. And that's what they would like. Well, the beauty is, Avaya has that kind of a platform. But it's important to understand the concept of a web service and that exposed kind of capability. Because, in the Avaya world, this is a slide I've used for a very long time, talking about the kind of the life cycle of the PBX. And in the old days, right, you had application connection management and access all kind of bundled together, and the TDM was the name of the game. And we kind of moved into what most customers are doing today is, they've made the switch to voice over IP. But you find out pretty quick that H.323 is just a packetized version of ISDN. In fact, Q.931 is the same call signaling that's in both of those protocols. So all it literally is a packetized version of TDM in a way. But that's what a lot of people do. The newer systems, and when I say new, I'm really, I kind of call it, I incorrectly tag this as the future, only because, a lot of customers are still kind of living in that middle column. But, anybody who's running Aura 6, that's something, I'll say, has this ability to very much separate out the guts of the system. So the access layer, we use SIP, whether it's SIP phones, SIP trunks, but more importantly, we get access to the application. So the things that Avaya would, let's just call it communication manager, you were stuck with whatever Avaya came up with. And if you needed a new feature, well, you got to go through a process, and hopefully you can get them to develop that feature and add it in, and hopefully they didn't break anything in the process. But it was very tough for you to be creative with their platform because it was all very tightly self-contained. With Aura 6, Avaya has the ability to break those things apart. So they've adopted this idea of IMS, or IP multimedia subsystems. And it's very much a SOA-based architecture, services-oriented architecture. And it gives me the ability to get in the middle of a call flow without having to know the guts of being in the middle of a call flow. So one of the first things we did when we got this new architecture, with Aura 6, is we wrote an app that allowed you to change call coverage. Where most people think of call coverage as ring the phone 3 times to go to voicemail, we're like, well, that's just dumb. I mean, what if I'm not at my desk? Why are you even ringing? Why are you even waiting by ringing 3 phones and then you go to voicemail? Why don't you just go straight to voicemail? And our answer is, well, yeah, that sounds good. How the PBX doesn't know that? How is it supposed to know whether you're in the office? And we're like, yeah, but I've got these other apps that do know. How about I just go ask them? So we wrote an app with Aura 6 that allows you to say, well, okay, if you receive a call, before we ring the phone, let's go talk to Microsoft Exchange and find out if you're in a meeting or out of the office. And if you're available, the phone will ring. If not, we just send it straight to voicemail. I could even take that a step further and say, well, what if you're on my VIP list? You could even say, well, I could reply back to the person and say, hey, Dave's in a meeting right now, but he has availability at 3. Would you like me to block some time on his calendar? Again, I'm not saying you want to give that to everybody, but for somebody on my VIP list, absolutely. So it takes call coverage and puts it on steroids. Now, the only thing Avaya did was give me the ability to be creative, right? We're the ones that created that. But without that platform, I couldn't have dreamed of doing that kind of an environment or an application. And that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to do, is to say, you bought a really great platform. You can't expect the manufacturer to come with every little bit of creativity of how it applies directly to your business. There's just too many variations of business, too many variations of features, and everybody wants it a little bit different. Yet at the same time, I don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. I don't want to rebuild a PBX from scratch. So literally, I could take pieces of Communication Manager if I wanted and change the features related to it. Now, how we do that, admittedly, is not the easiest concept to understand, right? If you're not a developer, you don't think web services are cool. You don't know how cool web services are. So I use an example of something I use all the time. It's a website. It's ift.com, IFTTT.com, and ift is short for if this then that. Hey, if you only walk away from this presentation with one thing, go check out ift, right? Because it's really cool. It allows you, a normal human being to join different things that exist on the internet together without you having to be a developer. Literally in the most easiest, simplistic developer command, you do if this then that, right? I mean, it's almost like a hello world kind of thing. And this just is a trigger, and then that is an action. And what IFT does is IFT has built connectors using all of these, what you'd think of as websites, but those websites offer web services that can access the stuff that's going on behind the scenes on the web server. For example, ESPN. I don't ever use ESPN.com. I never do. I don't go to ESPN.com. I'm not a user of ESPN.com. However, I subscribe to, I use ESPN.com, but I don't ever go to their website, because behind the scenes, they've exposed APIs that tell you certain kinds of things, of like information related to sports. So what IFT allows you to do is go use those standard connectors, what IFT calls channels, and piece them together in more creative ways. So you go to if.com and you say, hey, when something happens on this web service, do something on a different web service. As an example, okay, I don't ever go to ESPN.com, the website, but I have an IFT recipe running all the time that says, if ESPN tells me that the Green Bay Packers score a touchdown, for those of you that know me, I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin, I will always be a Packer fan. If ESPN.com tells me that the Green Bay Packers scored a touchdown, then I want you to flash my Philips Hue light bulbs. Now, if you're familiar with Philips, I think they even sell this at Home Depot now, but you can certainly go to Amazon and you can buy LED lights that screw into your regular lamps that are remotely controllable from this little hub that they sell you. So I probably have 5 or 6 of these Philips Hue light bulbs throughout my house, and I use them almost more for status, right? You know, if it's raining out, I turn them blue. If it's sunny out, I turn them yellow. And if I actually want lights, yes, I can do that as well. But what's cool is I literally say, when ESPN.com tells me that the Green Bay Packers score a touchdown, flash my Philips Hue light bulbs green and gold. That's really cool. And I'm not a developer. And try to do that yourself would be impossible, right? For me, anyway. I'm not a developer. I wouldn't know how to do it. I have another one that's, those of you that know me, I'm going bald, I'd like to say. My wife says, dude, too late, you're already bald. But I have it so that when weatherchannel.com tells me that the UV index is above 7, send me a SMS text message telling me to put on sunscreen. And these things are running all the time on IFT. And you can connect literally almost 300 different things out on the internet together to do your bidding. And I think that is awesome, and it's a really great example of the idea of somebody else did the work, you just want to borrow the work that they did. Because I know I want to bring this back to Avaya, right? I detoured just to kind of explain the concept of a web service. What we're really showing here is, in this case, it's Avaya Breeze, formerly known as the Engagement Development Platform. Before that, it was Collaboration Environment, but they just renamed it at Enterprise Connect. We're currently on version 3.1, and Avaya is creating those same kinds of connectors to various parts of their product portfolio, like Scopia, like Avaya Communication Manager, like there's some WebRTC kinds of things. There's real-time speech engines. So these connectors make it so that you don't have to know how to get inside the guts of some of these products. They've exposed some capabilities, and now you get to do whatever you want with them. So not only is Avaya using this platform to develop their features, for example, if there's any Nortel people on the call, the one thing I've learned about Nortel people is they love their call parking page. Right, they've got Nortel had this call park app that they just love. Now, I'm not saying it's better or worse than Avaya's call park. I'm just saying it's different, and people who loved it love it. Well, if I can't just go change that and say, okay, fine, I'll use this other call park instead of the one that was in Communication Manager. So what Avaya did was they used EDP, now known as Breeze, to build a new feature that is leveraging some of the existing content without having to re-engineer and redevelop Communication Manager. So Avaya is adding capabilities to Aura through Breeze. Well, and the beauty of it is that exact same engine, that exact same platform is what I would use as a systems integrator, and exactly what your developers could use if they were going to write snaps. So again, some very cool kinds of things, you know, and that Run With Me app that I talked about is leveraging a lot of those components. So we use the where is it on here? The WebRTC plugin that you see, because that creates a communication session from an iPhone to your Avaya system. Behind the scenes, we're leveraging you know, the Avaya Contact Center. So that's the work assignment snap-in. And so all we're doing is piecing together some things that already existed and doing something more creative with them. And this is kind of the power of this idea of taking web services and developing them in a way that you are going to want to do that. Now, what's really cool is that Enterprise Connect last week, Avaya announced the Snap Store, so that people who are interested in developing snap-ins for Breeze can go ahead and simply you know, they could build it for their own reason, and they could upload it to the Snap Store to maybe sell it for other people. And so I think we'll start seeing that store grow, you know, as, hey, maybe some guy just, oh, this was a cool thing, here, let's throw it up here and do it for free. Kind of like the iPhone iTunes App Store. And others are like, oh, this could actually be a revenue stream for me. And so you'll start seeing more and more of those kinds of applications. And there's a ton of really cool stuff in here. You know, one of the snap-ins that Avaya came up with is the real-time speech search. And I find this to be helpful because a lot of people say, well, I already do real-time speech analytics with my call recording. And I'm like, no, you really aren't. What you're doing is you're tagging calls so that you can go back and search for them later. Or maybe you're triggering to begin the recording or to get a supervisor to hop on a call. But I think of this particular real-time speech as being a way to provide immediate feedback to your agents. And the scenario I think of, again, I make it personal. If I'm driving my car, and a lot of people say, yeah, I can. It's fairly common that you can get a summary report now from your car. I don't know if Prius does this or not, but it'll tell you, hey, the last month you got this gas mileage, and you know, hey, if you drove better, less aggressively, you could have saved money, you know, in gas mileage. And I'm like, well, that's fantastic. What am I going to do with that information? I'm not really, you know, it was something that happened over the last month. It was more of a summary kind of a deal. And I think if you could get it more real time, that would be more interesting. So if all of a sudden this report, and by the way, I bought a new car, and it does this. It literally, on the screen, it will say, hey, if you slow down right now to X, I can save you 4 miles per gallon. And so it's giving it to me real time, which means it's affecting my behavior now. And if you relate that back to call recording, when a lot of people, they record calls with the intention of doing scorecarding, right? You know, you score the call, and I usually ask customers, well, what's the feedback loop on that? So let's say you've randomly sampled calls, you've evaluated them and assigned them a scorecard. When do you review that back with the agent? And best case I've heard is it's measured in days. Worst case I've heard it's measured in weeks. And I'm like, well, what good is that really doing? I mean, if you come back and say, hey, that call that you had, it sucked. You do better. And you're like, okay, well, maybe by playing the call, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But what it's not doing is it didn't affect the call in real time. And what real-time speech allows you to do is change that to say, I want, for consistency of our calling, I want you to open the call and thank them for their business, introduce yourself. I want you to, you know, talk about maybe an upsell of some kind, like, hey, have you looked at ordering cheesy bread with this pizza? And then make sure to close the call saying thank you. And what you have the ability to do, because this isn't a canned application per se, it's an engine, but I could develop cool things with it. I can now maybe create literally on the agent's desktop a checklist. And as they say the things that they're supposed to say, like, hey, you really, for compliance purposes, you have to say this call is going to be recorded, or I need you to repeat what the customer said. And I need to know, well, I could literally have a checklist and a check mark go next to the item every time somebody says what they're expected to say. But it's also, there's no reason why it couldn't be dynamic. Like if the system hears that they said, cheesy bread, then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, hey, they're interested in cheesy bread. Let's change checklist item number 6 to, well, would you like garlic cheesy bread? Or would you like a salad with that? Because we found statistically that people who buy cheesy bread also like salad. And so I could dynamically change this list based on what the customer is saying, and I could ensure compliance, because if all of a sudden I skip the, let's say, could I offer you checkbox, and you go to the next one, like, hey, thank you for calling, we could all of a sudden, flash an alert that says, hey, you're not done with this call yet. Go offer them something and give them a chance to fix the call in real time, rather than just report on it 3 days or 3 weeks later. So this is just an example of a snap-in that somebody created that allows you to get in the middle of all this stuff, leveraging a lot of the existing things. WebRTC is another one. I already gave an example of how we have used WebRTC, whether it's on a mobile device, whether it's on a browser. WebRTC is very open in terms of its usability, but not a lot of people are using it yet because it's kind of hard. Well, it becomes very easy because it's just a connector. It's a snap-in into Breeze that allows you to start creating mobile apps. If anybody in the financial industry, I almost guarantee you've got an app. Wouldn't it be great if you could have a click-to-call button that instead of dialing, actually sets up a voice over IP session directly over the internet into your call center? And maybe I want video. Now, again, a lot of people say, well, no, video is overrated. I really don't want to talk or to see somebody in my call center. Our customers don't want the call center to see them. And I'm like, yep, totally fair. It just depends on the business. American Express finds video to be useful because they tend to be more on the quote unquote business side of credit. Same way with Amazon, right? The Kindle they view that as an important thing. But I see a lot of customers that say, no, our customers don't want to be on video and our agents don't want to be on video. And I would still encourage you to think of video not so much as hey, can we see each other and talk to each other, but can I use video as a multimedia thing to help with the conversation? Like anybody doing desktop support or tech support for a product. Like I remember calling into a dealer for my lawnmower, and I said, yeah, hey, I need to order the skid plate. Actually, it was for a snowblower. The skid plate that's on the bottom. I know it's a Yardman snowblower, but I don't know what year it is. And they're like, well, hey, do me a favor, take a picture of it. Or hey, can you do video and show me? And all of a sudden I showed them that item. And how cool would that be they say, oh yeah, I know exactly what model that is. It's this one, and don't worry, you don't have to look up the part number. I know exactly what you need. It's part number 755282. We'll have it shipped there, or if I want to bring it in, we'll have the part waiting at the dealer for you. So there's a lot of really cool things that I can do with video that is beyond can we see each other? It doesn't always have to be about seeing each other. Use it as an enhanced communication tool to show something. That becomes almost more powerful, I think. The other thing that's cool is and I don't know if they're renaming this, but it's the engagement development platform snapping called the Engagement Designer. And the Engagement Designer is not quite as easy as if this, then that. because you just can't, right? It needs to be more powerful than that for the enterprise. But it allows you to drag and drop elements and say, okay, here, let's go grab a Scopia conference and let's have it feed into here. Let's bring WebRTC in and offer some information, and maybe let's do some real-time speech, and you know, it gives you more of a drag and drop capability that you can build your own connectors in here. You could connect to other things that you have, like if in your business, if you have an application, chances are pretty good that those developers have also exposed web services for other applications. It makes integrating between applications easier. So a lot of developers will they will add in their own web services that can be used for something other than the standard user interface. Well, these plugins, you know, on the screen here with the engagement designer, I could build one of those that says, hey, go talk to my web service. Here's the IP address, here's the RESTful call you need to make, here's the data you're going to get back, and now I could start making either routing decisions or communication decisions based on that data. So as soon as you start thinking in terms of RESTful web services, sky's kind of the limit as to what you can do, and it's really just kind of more or less limited to your creativity and your understanding of the business. But that's where we can help. You know, so there's a lot of things that we can do, you know, anywhere from, hey, we just need help installing EDP, you know, or now Breeze, all the way to, hey, you have developers, but you'd like to have them with a block of hours that they can call to pick the brains of one of our developers to say, hey, this is what I want to do. How do I do that? All the way to, like I talked about with the jogging app, is we wrote it. You know, we determined what the application needed to be with the customer, but we went and wrote the entire, you know, the iPhone app, as well as all the back-end stuff. So a lot of things that we can do, from, hey, we're just going to help you a little bit, or hey, we can do the whole thing for you. The reality is every customer is somewhere in between those, you know, just depending on what kind of capabilities they have. But again, it's about understanding your business, and that's where you need to know what your top 10 list is. Again, we can use kind of Gartner's top 10 list and say, okay, statistically speaking, this is what people use and what they're doing, but it gives us, you know, some options, you know, just some talking points. And what I find is most customers are pretty close to this list. But I think when you put your projects in the terminology of this kind of a list, you immediately identify sponsorship, because I guarantee your executive teams have they have goals and objectives. You know, we just started a new year, right? Everybody you know, who's affiliated with a bigger company got their performance reviews, and it's all based on goals. And that's all the different kinds of things that you can do. Find out what those goals are. Find out who is getting a bonus this year for increasing enterprise growth, or for who is improving the way they attract and retain the workforce. You know, what are they doing, and how can I support them and be more effective with that? I guarantee your Avaya PBX or your Link Skype for Business system, it will have a much easier time of getting funding and you know, budget when you start talking in those kinds of terms, not just the, hey, we have an old system, I'm going to replace it with a new old system, and it's going to do the exact same thing it did 20 years ago. No CFO wants to pay for that. But when you start talking in terms of these, of how you can impact the business, that changes that whole conversation. You get executive sponsorship, you get budget, and ultimately you get stickiness. It's going to be really, really hard to rip out a system that is so deeply tied to within the business, as opposed to, hey, if you can switch from this vendor to that vendor to the other vendor to another vendor, it means you weren't doing anything cool. You were doing all the commodity, you know, this coffee for that coffee. And it becomes much harder to do it when you start diving deeper into the business. So first of all, thank you for suffering through my fire alarm. It will be a story to tell. I'm here in Atlanta doing some we have a QBR, an executive QBR. And as I walked out of this building with all the rest of the people, they're all taking pictures of me like, okay, I'm doing a webinar from the parking lot during a fire drill. So I'm very interested to see what those turn out to be. I apologize greatly for that. I think we got it mostly back on track. But again, I appreciate you attending and sticking with us. Kelly, are there questions that people have, or do we want to wrap it up? Or
Yeah, we actually have one really great question at this time. So if we have a minute, the question is, what improvements to this development process come with the Aura 7.0 platform?
That is a good question. There's a number of different things that happen with 7. Probably the biggest one is Avaya is moving more of the capabilities, into EDP. For example, Presence. Presence was, probably one of the biggest, most obvious, glaringly cool things. Presence used to be, the Avaya Presence server was a standalone service. It was actually based on Jabber, back in this when Jabber was still more of an open source standard. The nature of that platform was, okay, it wasn't very scalable. There was no way to make it HA, high availability. And so Avaya actually rebuilt the Presence engine as a snap-in into EDP, now known as Breeze. There's also another one, and I forget what the name of it is. It's something call control, and it's basically making web services front-ended to basically an AES server. So a lot of the things you used to have to know TSAPI for, I can now do in RESTful web services, and ultimately it's a connector, a standard connector to AES. It doesn't replace AES. AES still has its role in what it does, but you now have that as a standard connector. So those are probably two that I think of that come with Release 7. Hopefully people watch the webinar that we did last month on Aura 7, and if not, we've got that posted on YouTube. You can go back and watch it, but we kind of covered, hey, what's cool about 7? There's a lot of stuff. It was definitely a meaty session on what's new with Aura 7, but things like the media server, the Avaya Aura media server, which is a software-based DSP resource, potentially eliminating the need for MedPros and G450 DSPs. There's certain scenarios where it doesn't apply, but so I definitely go back and take a look at the what's new in Aura 7 to get more of that. But specific to the engagement development platform / Breeze, those two items I mentioned, Presence and again, I forget the name of the plugin, but it's basically a plugin to AES to do some pretty cool things. That changed in 7.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Dave, and thank you for everyone for bearing with us today. We will be sending out a copy of the slides and the recording. And please join us next month on April 21st at 10 a.m. Central Time for our next webcast. Our experts, Jonathan Reddish and Jim Cook, will discuss getting the most out of your Avaya UC/CC systems. That will conclude our webinar for today.